Plantation is a 1976 film directed by Mario Pinzotti, unofficial film of the Black Emmanuelle series, among other things without Laura James. In the pre-Civil War American South, Emmanuelle, a plantation owner's daughter, while outwardly a dainty Southern belle, brutally abuses the slave in her charge. When her fiancé is bitten by a snake, he falls for Emmanuelle's beautiful African American maid, whose kindness and skill save his life. Insanely jealous, Emmanuelle continues her sadistic behavior towards her charges, and when her fiancé announces he plans to wed the maid, Emmanuelle gives her to her even more brutal hired man, and her fiancé is powerless to stop them. Can Emmanuelle learn an important lesson in love before it's too late for everyone? Despite the title, this was absolutely nothing to do with either the French Emmanuelle series with Sylvia Crystal or the Black Emmanuelle series with Laura James, directed by Jody Amato. This is another Italian rip-off of the American film Mandingo. Since it's a low-budget Italian knockoff of a movie that was already indefensibly trashy, it goes without saying that it's not good. But the more useful thing to do, perhaps, is compare it to the other main Italian-made Mandingo ripoff, which was imaginatively titled Mandinga. The American South portrayed in this movie is marginally more convincing than the one in Mandinga, and the black characters somewhat resemble actual African American. The Italians were actually quite good at interracial epics. They practically had a whole 1970s subgenre dedicated to it, represented by some of the work of Jody Amato, The Giallo, Tropic of Cancer, and even going all the way back to 1970 with Pier Vivarelli film Il Dio Serpenti. However, they definitely weren't so good at historical drama or at portraying the American South. And their black actors, like Laura James for instance, often didn't even look convincingly black, let alone like African American. The lead here is Malisa Longo, like Maria Rosario Rusi, who played the title character in Mandinga. Longo was basically just a nice piece of tail. However, you could say the same thing about even the famous cult actresses of the era, like Barbara Busse, Rosalba Neri, or Edwidge Fenech. Longo is not on the level of those actresses, but she was a decent second-tier actress, kind of in the class of Femi Bonucci, Gloria Guida, Lily Carati, or Mariangela Giordano. She is definitely better than Rusi as is in Mandinga, and she is occasionally quite effective as a wicked southern plantation lady who takes off all her cloth and bathes in a stream in order to cruelly entice her black male slave. Of course, if you just don't want to see an Italian rip-off of Mandingo, you should avoid this. For better or worse, it doesn't really compare to the American model, which was filmed in the real American South with real African American actors. But it's a definite improvement over Mandinga. This somewhat turgid Mandingo knockoff by the same director who did the other principal Italian one of the era, Mandinga, certainly doesn't skimp on the exploitation. The plantation mistress is your standard racist, spoiled, blonde nymphomaniac who keeps seducing blacks, stirred, then crying rape, and having them whipped, tortured, and killed. This is standard stuff. Somewhat funnier is the deadly earnest speechifying of the hero, who starts out as her fiancé, but after a slave girl's herbal remedy saves from a snake bite death, he is born again as an ex-racist. He and the slave girl, whose middle name happened to be Emmanuelle, have more of a love affair after that point, and say ridiculously lofty things about forcing a future without prejudice that actually seem more likely to happen back in 1976 than it does now. Meanwhile, the white Emmanuelle just continues burning every man in sight. The latter is dubbed by the same voice actress, who I swear did the English language version, dubbing for just about every principal female role in Italian exploitation movie during the 1970s and 80s. There is some terribly silly dialogue, but despite its fairly busy pace, Plantation is on the whole too pedestrian in concept and execution to be hilariously bad. I did laugh out loud a few times, however, particularly during an incongruous quote from the lyric of 01 Man River. There is quite a bit of nudity. The actors are pretty attractive and were in several cases probably cast mostly for their impressive physique. Production values are adequate for this sort of mid-70s Italian exploitation movie which was shot in widescreen. The something weird transfer has some problem toward the beginning. For a while the framing is off so the bottom of the screen spill onto the top, but you are surely not going to find a better print. I thought the movie was considerably longer than IMDb has it listed as, but it turned out that in fact the DVD is 2 hours long only because there's a couple 8mm late 60s early 70s nudie loop at the end. In Louisiana, Emmanuelle and Lawrence, children of two families who own plantation, meet and fall in love. After an initial romance, Emmanuelle begins to treat slave increasingly badly, while Lawrence falls in love with Emmanuelle's maid, a black girl named Judith Emmanuelle. When Emmanuelle discovers the relationship between Judith and Lawrence, she enacts a revenge by trying to have the young man killed. Lawrence killed two plantation employees in self-defense. Eventually, Emmanuelle is killed by those who hunted down the Judith-Lawrence couple. Emmanuelle and Lawrence are the respective sons of two wealthy plantation owners in slave American time. Their engagement is well received by both families because a possible marriage would combine the riches of both. Emmanuelle is cruel and sadistic towards slaves, in particular toward the young and handsome Elia, whom he repeatedly punishes and tortures by the family's henchmen. Lawrence, on the other hand, proved to be more well disposed to the point that he cheated on his girlfriend with a black slave maid, also named Emmanuelle. The future father-in-law discovers them but passes over them. One day, Lawrence is bitten by a snake and is rescued by the care of the black Emmanuelle, who, despite the violence suffered, is lavish with kindness and surpasses the medicine of white in experience. Between the two is born of the tender, jealous the white Emmanuelle. First of all, she will try to have the black woman raped by her henchman, then to betray her boyfriend with the black Elia with whom she is actually in love. But her plan for revenge are upset by a series of unforeseen events and violence. The message is good and unusual for the genre cinema of the time, because starting from a basis of racial hatred, we move on to an ending with a sentimental relationship of a multi-ethnic couple, complete with dialogue on the prospect of a better future world in which love can exist between black and white. But what doesn't work so well is the direction and the setting. The final beautiful moral comes out after an hour and 20 of laughable quarrels, various reconciliation, violence that is not spectacular at all, and lackluster embraces. Roberto Pregadio's soundtrack with a monotonous and sad melody failed to animate the action, rather it dampened it. It is very difficult with a less than excellent budget and a poorly experienced director to reconstruct the America of the 19th century in the Italian countryside. Even more so if the not very credible location recall the setting of dozens of other titles. between the western and the exotic, and if the building have red brick roof complete with gutter. Many scenes are evidently shot in a hurry without too much attention to detail, such as dialogue and certain internal connection. The protagonist, one white and the other black, who give rise to the title, are not called that by chance. The name is given to them by the notoriety that in those years the most famous French and Italian erotic series were enjoying respectively with Sylvia Crystal and Laura Jamesa. The title would cunningly combine them, but the Emmanuelle represented here are very distant, both in time and in characterization. Like the models imitated, this film is also decidedly erotic, as demonstrated by the many love scenes both between the boyfriend and with their respective black lovers. But it never reaches the expressive charge of the luckiest traits. Some playbills and poster want title name to have one, other to M, so as to confuse which of the two options was the real intention of the authors. Ultimately an erotic B movie that on the one hand tried to scrape together spectators by exploiting the ambiguous title, and on the other try to launch an edifying moral message unfortunately arising from a decidedly crude staging. Emmanuelle wants to take over her father's slave plantation after she feels he is going too soft on them for only making them work 10 hours a day. She is said to be married to Lawrence, but his attempted rape of a slave calls off his engagement after the slave forgive him. This sends Emmanuelle into more of a rage against the slave, even though she has her own secret desire. Leave it to the Italian to pick up where America started and try to push it to new levels. Mandingo was a controversial movie when it was released in America, so it makes sense for Italy to try and rip it off, and why not just throw the Emmanuelle name in there as well. If you are looking for a hard-hitting drama, then this probably won't be for you. But if you enjoy a bit of trash and exploitation, then the film actually delivers a good time. I should point out that this pre-Civil War drama has some pretty campy moments, including the melodramatic and preachy ending. I'm not going to ruin it for people, but I give the film credit for at least trying to say something positive about how everyone should respect all races. With that said, there is no question that this is an exploitation movie at heart, so expect a lot of nudity, a couple rape scenes, and of course a lot of violence towards the slave. This film obviously wouldn't go over too well today, but I doubt many people will be watching it unless they are already an exploitation fan. The film benefits from the setting, which feels authentic, and I'd also argue that the violence is effective for what it is. You have got various whipping, and they take it a step further by throwing salt on their wound. The Emmanuelle woman is a deranged psycho here, and she's also a nymph, which just add to the fun. This film is also known as Plantation Passion, which was the title of the print I watched. That's a pretty fitting title for this exploitation film that manages to keep you entertained throughout its trashy 81 minutes. In Louisiana, the Mr. Thomas and Mr. Johnson plantation are bordering. Their respective children, the capricious Emmanuelle and the uncertain Lawrence, know each other, date each other, and everything suggests that despite the escapade with black slave and slave, the two marry, forming a single fortune. However, as Emmanuelle becomes more and more captivated with her employees, Lawrence falls in love with the negress Judith, second name Emmanuelle. Being that the maid of the white girlfriend, the young man has to intervene abruptly, to the point of killing, to Johnson employee and seriously offending Emmanuelle, who will do everything to get him killed by the Herculean slave Elia. Lawrence, completely changed in feeling by the relationship with Judith, in vain rushes to Emmanuelle, who is accidentally killed by those who with her are chasing the degenerate white. The film essentially began with a southern belle by the name of Emmanuelle, who is, by her own admission, both spoiled and superficial. She is also extremely sadistic with the slave her father owned, and uses every opportunity to abuse them whenever possible. As it so happened, her fiancé Lawrence also knows slave, but even though he also has them beaten on occasion, considers them to be valuable property and doesn't want them damaged too badly. That doesn't, however, prevent him from raping some of the young female whenever he feels like it. In any event, Emmanuelle is quite possessive, and the thought of him spending any time with a black woman is something that she simply cannot tolerate. That said, when he begins to show sign of affection for her black house servant Judith, it enraged Emmanuelle to the point that she decided to sleep with one of the black male slave named Elia. Unfortunately, her sadistic nature soon gets the better of her, and this causes serious problem for all concerned. Now, rather than reveal anymore, I will just say that this Italian exploitation film was obviously a low-budget production, and it suffered as a result. Not only was the acting second-rate, but so was the film quality as well. Likewise, a number of the love scenes seem a bit too hurried, and as a result this served to cheapen the movie even further. Be that as it may, I wasn't very impressed with this film, and I have rated it accordingly. 19th century southern United States before the Civil War. The beautiful Emmanuelle, daughter of a plantation owner, perversely seduces and abuses slave. When her fiancé is bitten by a snake, the one who saved her life is a black, kind and skilled servant. Her fiancé then falls in love with the maid and announces that he plans to marry her. Driven by an unhealthy jealousy, Emmanuelle continues with her sadistic and debauched behavior.